It's a hard race for all sorts of reasons, and a fascinating race in that regard, because the race organisers like to throw the dice onto the table in all sorts of ways, and it's much less predictably structured than the Tour de France. You don't get the clumps of mountains all in those units that you do in the Tour de France. It tends to be much more mountainous. On this year's race, there are many more summit finishes. It's a harder race, and it's a hard race for the analysts to read as well, because people going into the Giro d'Italia might also be intending to ride the Tour de France, and they might be just riding themselves into shape for the Tour de France, or they might be riding it to win. They may not even know themselves when they get to the start line which of those two ambitions they're targeting, and that may only emerge during the race. And it is much more susceptible, much more open to unpredictable winners and unpredictability at its core, I think.
And, you know, the winner of the Tour de France instantly becomes a global name, but the winner of the Giro d'Italia doesn't necessarily become a global name in the same way. But within the cycling fraternity, is there as much respect given to winners of the Giro as there is to the Tour?
I think if you understand cycling and you get its history, you will realise very swiftly that the Giro d'Italia within the cycling world carries huge prestige, huge esteem. And it's only in recent years that the Tour de France, in the Armstrong years, frankly, has sort of reared its head fully above the Giro d'Italia. In the days of Stephen Roche, for example, who won both in one season, the Giro and the Tour de France, I think to this day he probably claims that the Giro was his greater win, and it carried much more merit and more prestige with it. For the purist, there's nothing better than the Giro d'Italia. Whether the global audience understands that or not, I don't know. It also tends to be a much more Italian affair than the Tour de France is a French affair. That's partly because the French have, a bit like the British at Wimbledon tennis, they just don't have a track record of producing recent winners, whereas the Italians do and can repeatedly win their own national race. So it's got that kind of real cultural richness about it that makes it very identifiably Italian.
And looking ahead briefly to this year's race, Ned, from a British perspective, obviously there's more time trial kilometres in this year's edition than there was last year, which, along with Chris Froome's work at the Tour last year, has led Sky and Wiggins to perhaps prioritise the Giro this time round. A British rider has never won the Giro. He's had quite a quiet season so far, Bradley Wiggins. How much of a chance do you think he's got this time round? I mean, what are we now, just a few weeks away?
Every race organiser, whether it's the Tour de France or the Giro d'Italia, design their course with a certain kind of rider in mind to attract that rider and make him think he can win it. And I think they've had a good look at Bradley Wiggins, and they've quite wanted him to have a go at this race and to try and win it. Now, can he? Is he in the kind of form? If you believe the mood music coming out of Team Sky's training camps, his numbers, because they love numbers, are better than ever. We've seen no evidence of that so far. He's frankly not ridden, he's not turned his pedals in anger yet, even in the races that we've seen. So there's nothing to read into that other than what we believe to be the case. We won't know whether Bradley Wiggins is in the kind of form that can win a course that's not entirely suited to him until we see him really put under pressure on the first summit finish of the Giro d'Italia. Then and only then will we know quite whether he's got the heart and the ability and the form to do it. He might find that if it isn't going his way, he might just back off a little bit and save some of his form for July, and we know what that means, the Tour de France.
And just finally, you mentioned the fanatical Italian support and their love of the Giro, which is almost within their DNA. The home contingent this time round, I think Scarponi finished 4th last year, but I suppose the big name perhaps this year with his new team, Astana, is perhaps Nibali.
I think if you're looking to serious opposition for Sky and Bradley Wiggins or even Richie Porte riding alongside him, I think you would have to look first and foremost to either Ryder Hesjedal, who won it last year, but certainly to Vincenzo Nibali now. He's left Liquigas, the Italian national team, to all intents and purposes, and he's joined Astana. He's got a good team around him, and they will throw the kitchen sink at it. He rode the Tour de France last year and looked tired, I thought, and it wasn't a really credible challenge to Wiggins. He's a better rider than that, and he's targeted the Giro d'Italia. He's an Italian. He'll be focused on that, and he's a big unknown, and he's a big threat in those mountains to Bradley Wiggins, I think.